and others. I didn't think I was less than they were, but I didn't think, what am I going to add that they don't already have? So I don't want to go into a career that is replicating all of the things, and that the moving into African activities, international activities, created what essentially became one of the most significant outgrowths of the student movement, but not in the way that one would have thought. It created an opportunity for me to play a role on a global stage. I was a member of the Trilateral Commission.
Wait just a second. You hearing that? And of course it dies down now.
Yeah.
Okay, start with I was a member.
I was a member of the Trilateral Commission, a group founded by David Rockefeller. And at the time, I was the only African American on that, a group of business and political leaders from Europe, North America, and Japan. Well, that was the Trilateral Commission played a very important educational experience for me, but it also provided an opportunity to bring Africa into the discussions, as I was the only one who did bring Africa into the discussions at that level. But it also was an opportunity when I was with the Ford Foundation in Lagos, Nigeria. I lived in Lagos for 4 years. When I was with the Ford Foundation, Ben Brown called me and said, I think we're going to win. And what he was referring to was President Carter's campaign. Ben Brown was Jimmy Carter's deputy campaign manager in the 76 campaign. Ben said, I think we're going to win, and I think you should come back home. Leave Nigeria, come home. And what he had in mind was his awareness that of the people from our movement, I was the one with the most substantial national security, foreign policy, foreign experience, and that he would like for me to play a role. And so I became a member of the Carter Transition Commission National Security Advisory Team, which was responsible for setting the framework for Carter's foreign policy and for selecting members of his administration. From that, I became Secretary of Vance's Africa advisor, the first African American on the policy planning staff in the State Department. So all of that came out of the student movement and the, I think, probably confidence that we got. I think a relationship in which we trusted each other. I think the notion that African Americans don't help African Americans was never true, was never, ever true in my judgment. I think that we have tried to help where we have had access. We have tried to provide access to others. And I think you will see this, the kind of friction that was supposed to be a part of the AU Center activities. I think we debunked that. I think that what we did in the student movement created an esprit, a set of relationships that transcended any of those small parochial boundaries that people said that we had. And I don't think that's something that gets attention. But one had to be a student at those schools to know how separate we were at the time, to know how petty we could be with each other, and to see us actually together. It was, when we were in our meetings, it was though there were no differences at all. None of this ever came up as an issue. None of the rivalries or anything ever came up as something that was of any significance. And I think that's a part of the history that is a critical part of the history, because what we did in Atlanta could not have happened. We were very proud of Julian. We were very proud of Lunny. We were very proud of, and this is as fellow students. We were proud of ourselves for doing what we did. I don't think we ever thought that what happened. It changed all of our lives. Sorry.
There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. You actually went beyond one more step that you didn't talk about. You were deputy mayor of one of the largest cities of the United States. And that's also because of energy.
I'll have to recover.
That's okay. That's okay. Tell me about the emotion you just felt when we talk about everything that happened. I'm the recipient of what you guys did. Okay, I have my education. I see what you did and what you did and what you did, and there's something that wells up inside me. But you lived it.
Well, you know, I don't think people really ever knew. If you grew up in a small town, as I did, Griffin, with no indoor plumbing, no electricity, with illiterate parents, to come out of that environment and to have the impact that we had on our social order, I don't think people appreciate fully, even years later, the degradation and the mistreatment that we experienced in our daily lives. I don't think people knew or appreciated the full grounding of what we were rebelling against and what created the energy for us. Where, you know, even as a little boy in Griffin, if you were on the street and whites wanted you to move off the street, you had to move off the street. And in other cases where the brutality against ourselves, against our people, against our women, particularly against our women, the way in which we were treated, I don't think people realized the fuel that was creating to create a movement as strong as we had that had no history of being created that way. So I think there was a lot of energy that came from our circumstance, the way in which we were treated in Georgia. The way in which we were treated, one doesn't. In fact, my mother would say sometimes we treat dogs better. Now, I'd say that to my wife. Now we treat our dog better. But if you go back and look, we were not treated well at all. I mean, in any sphere, it was as though we were not human beings. So if you add all of this in together, then you've got a potential for a transformative change in society that essentially happened. And if one takes the big picture, it was essentially a nonviolent movement. It was essentially one in which we rose above the treatment that we had received and created a movement that was very different from any that had existed before. Now, when I'm at the State Department in a job that no black had ever had on the Secretary's staff, I get a call from Ed Koch and asked me if I would join his administration in New York. And in the process of making a decision whether I would do that, I called my friend Andy Bremer. I don't know if you remember. Andrew Bremer was the first African American on the Federal Reserve Board. He was an economist. And Andy told me when I talked with him, and I told Andy about this years later, he wanted to be, the job that he aspired to, he was in the Commerce Department. The job that he aspired to was to be in a position on the Secretary's policy planning staff. And you are going to leave the policy planning staff to go to New York City and be a commissioner in one of the, it just, to him, didn't make any sense. You're going to be a commissioner, and of all the things, the poverty programs in New York City, a commissioner for community development. But I went there and I talked to Ed, and I went back and I called Ed and said I wouldn't take the job. And he says, why? And I said, well, you've been calling blacks in New York poverty pimps, politicians, and I don't want to be a part of any administration in which people are, and I would not be a part of any administration in which there is a deliberate attempt to reduce the influence of African American politics and